Well, it has been a very interesting couple of days, few days, an interesting week, I suppose. But after the big run-up yesterday, Larry Goldberg, we had, of course, the normal profit taking today. To make matters more interesting, was Triple Witching Day. And Larry, who is the number one company in the world to now in terms of options trading?
It's got to be Tesla, right? Or
Well,
NVIDIA. NVIDIA.
NVIDIA has passed them. And Tesla is still number two, and then Apple, and then Intel. I'm sorry. Yeah, Intel. Listen to the
Yeah.
difference in the trading volumes comparatively. NVIDIA is at 3,752,000. Tesla at 2,000,006. So it drops a million. And then Apple drops another million to 1,000,004, and then Intel drops almost another million to 668,000. So it is just dramatic how much more trading happens with those with especially at this point Intel and Tesla. So on Triple Witching Day, you might expect some unusual volumes.
Maybe it's because I'm out of options in Tesla.
That's what happened. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, so firstly, I've got to fess up. I was absolutely wrong about the 25 basis points.
Ah,
I said that they would never do 50. I was as wrong could be. They went out on 50 and they were very proud of themselves doing the 50. And you know, I have to say, when they come to realign
the
the
indexes.
growth, the growth of you know, the economy
Oh, okay.
in a year's time when they do
Right.
the reset of, I think they'll show that we didn't grow at 2% or 1.8% or 2.2%. I think we grew at 0%.
Yes.
That's my honest opinion. I think they were late. I think that they should have done a 25-point raise at least the last quarter. I think, you know, I'm proud of them doing the 50-point. It shows that, they overcame whatever fear there is of the 50-point raise.
Yeah.
And I think it's not too early.
Yeah. I think that they were, the punditry believes that they were probably just really thinking about that real interest rate versus the Fed interest rate just being too crazy, too much of a difference, and the Treasury rate being too far different from the Fed rate, and that they felt like they had to do something to get that more in balance. And that's kind of what the punditry's been saying.
Well, the punditry, yeah, look, I'm as clueless as the rest of the pundits, probably more clueless, but at least as clueless. Um, I think we don't have very good tools. For a
Mhm.
modern economy, we really lack true insight into the accurate situation. The fact that we have to recast the numbers looking back, 3 months' time, 6 months' time, a year's time, depending on which number we're looking back on, is really a reflection of that situation. So I'm going to say that the problem lies not in the stars, it lies in our statistics.
Bad stats. Yeah. It was interesting that after you and I and Kathy have been talking about it for a year now, that the All In podcast, they mentioned it in terms of the employment numbers.
Yeah.
We also had the Fed himself. We had Chair Powell even mention that these stats are bogus and that he has to subtract every time they come out in order to get the right number. But what everybody seems to agree on is that the household survey is probably way better. There's probably a better look at what's really going on.
And that's just part of the error rates. It boggles the mind that we now in this age of, digital awareness and digital knowledge and digital capability that we don't have a means of tracking this in real time.
Yeah.
I mean, money movements are very, they're tracked on a, penny basis.
Right.
And so money movements are very important. You know, retail sales, money movements, debt, credit, payrolls, employment, um, all of these things should be, and the statistics of the population, all of this stuff should be compilable in real time.
Yeah. Well, Larry, as long as we've started out with the general economy as opposed to Tesla this time, let's just stick with it. I will come back to Tesla in a second. So, Kobasi letter just out today. He says Americans are officially out of savings. The U.S.
Yes.
net savings as a percent of GDP by households, business, and the government has been negative for 6 consecutive quarters. In other words, Americans are producing much less than they are consuming. Since 1947, there's only been two other times, he says, when savings were negative. That was 2008 and 2020. This comes after the U.S. government's deficit hit 2.1 trillion over the
Yeah.
last 12 months, while with spending reaching 6.9 trillion. At the same time, the personal savings rate fell to 2.9%, the lowest since 2008. So this, to me, you and I have talked about this for months and months and months. The consumer, when the consumer runs out of money, and this could happen overnight.
Yep.
And I think this is what the Fed has to know that. They've been watching this for the last 50 years, just like me, longer as an institution. Sometimes when they run out, they just run out. And it happens
But
nation.
look at the change. Look at the change. At the peak of the pandemic, late 21, we had a savings rate of 30%. I
I
mean,
know. Yeah.
unparalleled ever in
Unprecedented. Yes.
history,
Yes.
in the history we have of these numbers.
Right.
And now we're at zero. I mean, it's like the rate went up to here, total savings went up to here. Now the rate is negative and total savings are, literally disappearing. But there's a huge amount of money sitting in financial institutions and liquidity, I should say, in financial institutions and moreover in corporates
Right.
and and so there's this kind of weird imbalance.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, our savings rate has bottomed, and total savings of the consumer has disappeared.
Right.
This gigantic surplus has disappeared. But I'm not sure where credit card debt is
Oh,
and
it's
how.
it's not good. It's raising up. See, that's another thing. During the pandemic, when we had all that extra money and no place to spend it, people paid off their credit cards, but
Yeah.
now they're back to where they were, and we're starting to see the delinquencies starting to compound.
Are we? I haven't tracked that. I
Right.
was going to check that. Yeah.
And what we haven't been able to do right now, we haven't had the mortgage. We haven't been able to go grab money out of our homes
Oh,
because
that that's
the
not.
interest rates. So the HELOCs haven't been happening. People haven't been able to borrow that way. But now that we're down to a roughly 6.2% rate on mortgages, people are expecting refinancing and HELOCs to become, well, they're already becoming a hot thing again, as people
Well,
maybe will
yeah,
do.
mortgage rates aren't going to go down from this point. I think they went down in
Right.
anticipation,
Right.
and they actually went up a couple of basis
Right.
points. So I don't see them going down. So even borrowing at 6%, well, it's not bad. That's
Oh,
actually historically a pretty good rate.
right.
Um, and the question is, and there's a lot of equity in there, so
Mhm.
maybe that's what they turn to. But I'm very skeptical of the numbers. I don't believe in this 2% growth rate that the chairman spoke about with great pride, as if it was a good thing. So we'll see. I mean, it time will tell. and there will be a revision of these numbers, and
Sure.
that revision, I think, is going to be quite significantly down.
Right, right. So one of the things that I found very interesting today, you and I think, share kind of a mixed opinion of Gary Black. I see him as a very astute an analyst. I think
I
he
don't have a mixed opinion. I like Gary
okay,
Black.
right,
I think his analysis, people mistake his analysis for their analysis.
right.
People who are buying Tesla now or who are in Tesla now have got a very high conviction
Mhm.
of the long-term value of
Right,
Tesla.
right.
And we're all aware of the fact that Tesla can move very dynamically in very short order, as we've just seen,
Mhm.
up and down,
Right.
but it's going to move very dynamically. But we all share, I think, this sense of its long-term value. I don't think that Gary is much different from us, but Gary's job, his business, his calling is all about managing a portfolio of shares
Right.
and getting the maximum return out of it, in the near term.
Mhm.
I'm not sure he's doing that well at that. I don't follow his fund. He invited me to invest in it. It's not an investment I would ever make. I I'm a I'm an investor in high tech. That's all I know. It's all I've done well. I don't know anything about for the fund management business. But I do know that he has a very different mission to all the rest of us.
Sure. And
And I respect that.
yeah, and he looks at it from the standpoint of somebody who is a Wall Street fund manager.
Well,
And
he's a portfolio manager, PM,
and he,
and
and he
their job, we can criticize what they do as an industry. We can criticize that industry, and there's fairness in criticizing him, but that's his job.
right, right, right. So he tends to be more conservative. He tends to not give as much of a an optionality value to things like Optimus and Robotaxi. But what he said today was very interesting because I think that you and I and a couple of the other folks in the YouTube and X world have been saying this for a couple of months without saying it. And the stock market has already decided that what he's saying is true. But last time it was me who said this first. And he basically says the sentiment changed. And he's saying it's kind of just changed right now. He says the narrative switch on Tesla. I think we've all been, I'm sorry. He says, I didn't write down his actual quote. I'm sorry. I thought I did. But anyway, he was basically saying the narrative has switched. And one of the highest YouTube videos I've ever done was when I announced the narrative switch about a year ago. And it just blew up, and it was really true. We had a real narrative switch. But I think what we're now on is that trip to 2026, and people are starting to say the trip has started. We've reached that time, maybe a few weeks ago, where everybody kind of gets it that things are going to all start to mature in 2026.
Color me skeptical.
Okay.
I think there are a few traps on the way.
Oh yeah.
Um, I think we've been on this journey. Even when the stock was down in 130, or I don't know what it got down to,
101.
something like that, whatever it was. Um, I I had a very strong conviction in the narrative, and nothing changed for me. Um, so if you looked at the value of my portfolio, it changed.
Right, right.
But I never looked at the value of my portfolio. My brother looked at it, but
Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, that's my point, Larry. Is we're
yeah,
talking about the narrative not of Randy
yeah.
or of Larry Goldberg. We're talking about the narrative that the overall, not the whole stock market, but it's always going to be in the margins. That there's now this beginning of an understanding that robotaxi is almost here. that the rollout of the Model 3 next year, Model 2.5 or whatever next year, the Optimus is getting better and better. All these things,
Mm.
the semi truck, which I want to talk to you about in a minute, all these things are now kind of moving along again. We're looking at 50% growth in car sales again in 2025. So all that stuff is happening, and I think maybe the overall market, if you will, whatever that market brain is picking up on that, and we've gone up 30% in 90 days.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, we could go down that 30% before we go back up again. That's the only difference between you and I is you think we've made the turn and we're on the way. I say we're going to make that turn several times. I think we're going to go back down and up. Look, China is firing on all four
yep,
cylinders. There's
yep,
no doubt about it, none at all.
yep.
And we both said this a quarter ago, and it took, it took the quarter to convince us. And energy's there, and it's busy firing on all cylinders. Everybody's saying energy is going to go down a lot this quarter, and it may go down,
Right. Yep.
fine. Um, I, my sense, my very strong sense, is that we are going to have several trips up and down from 260 down again and up again. I hope I'm wrong. I
Yeah.
hope we go
Yeah.
from here to forever. But there it is.
So,
I
so,
mean,
so my take, and everybody in my audience knows this, my take is it's going to depend on the news on 1010. So if we go, I think we'll be at
and
two.
the
Of
quarterly
course,
earnings.
all of it'll matter.
Yeah.
But 1010 right now is the what do you want to call it? The real fulcrum.
Yeah, and my projection, we can go up to 250 the night before, and we go down to 220, 210 the day after.
I saw you agreeing with AJ on that the other day. And my only difference with you is that on reveals in the past, we've had a couple of reveals where the reveal was good enough and the stock continued up. Moreover, what you and he didn't report on was that even though the stock goes down on the day after and maybe the day after that, that by the end of the week, a week out, it's up again.
Sometimes.
Almost every single time. It's just
Where I differ from you is, I think the catalyst was Elon's presence and his mindset
right.
on the first quarter earnings
Uh-huh.
call was such a part. It was a different Elon turning up.
Right.
It was Elon of old saying, "Okay, we're opening, the next chapter," and then at the annual shareholders meeting,
Mhm.
when he said we've opened not a new chapter but a new book.
Mhm.
If you can connect those two dots, and the semi news, the China news, the launch, the 1010, the 12.5, all of that is important in helping to build on that foundation. But that's the foundation. Now, if Elon comes on 1010 with the same outlook and the same perspective and the same positive tone, I think it could be very powerful.
Mhm. Okay.
But there are serious political winds. There are serious political storms ahead, particularly if this particular administration goes on ahead, because this fight with the FAA is not nothing. It is
Right.
there is a lot that turns on it,
Yes.
and there are many fights to come if this administration wins the election.
Yeah, I have on my list for you today that one of your biggest hobby horses right now is definitely in the news, which is regulation overreach as it applies, and in particular, maybe pointed regulation overreach. The SEC today wants to fine Elon for not showing up for some meeting. I'm not sure that was all the detail that there was today, but there just seemed to be they just, always.
Well, you know, all you have to do is compare the FAA's approach to Tesla versus the FAA's approach to Boeing.
Boeing, right?
That's all you have to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Same organization, different client.
Right.
And the FAA prepared to, close their eyes to Boeing's manufacturing flaws that are so patent and so clear,
Right.
and their management, attitude
Right.
versus, what SpaceX are doing. And you're going to see the same in the vehicle business. You're going to see the same. And so, the continuation of this administration is a very serious problem for Tesla
Yeah. Yeah.
and SpaceX.
So the other thing that you've been talking about a lot this week has been the semi, because there was a lot of news on the semi with the Berlin presentation. They actually had a semi in the booth and a charger in the booth, and they had a talk given by Priestley of Tesla there in Germany. So, what were some of your thoughts with regard to that whole thing?
Firstly, I learned a lot that corrected a lot of my misconceptions. I wrote about people don't read the stuff I write because it's too long and too boring, but I wrote about it about a year ago because the Wall Street Journal had a piece on it in Heard on the Street at the Back. This idiot, Stephen Wilmot. I mean, what a blithering idiot. He's got it in for Tesla. So he wrote up about how the Volvo truck's going to outsell the Tesla truck. I mean, and everything he said about it was wrong. So I corrected him. However, I said a couple of things that were wrong. The first is I said it's unlikely this truck will be applicable to Europe.
Right.
The form factor is wrong. That's the first thing I said. And the second thing I said that was wrong is I said it's likely that it's going to be sold for short haul only.
Yeah.
And that was completely wrong because Pepsi are using it for, longer trips than short haul. Not very long trips, but certainly medium.
Yeah.
And that when you look at that, it significantly expands the TAM of that truck.
Yeah.
Now, it's going to be really hard for the TAM to reach 50,000 trucks a year in the United States. I'll tell you that.
Really?
How many trucks are sold every year?
300,000. Yeah.
Nowhere near.
300,000.
250 at the peak, but
okay, 250.
Currently it's about 200.
Okay.
But remember, that's for all use cases.
Yeah.
And the truck doesn't cover all use cases.
Well, but I think we've all agreed it's at least 80%. I think that's even Tesla's number.
No, I don't think it's Tesla's number.
Okay.
I think 80% is on the high side. I was wrong. I put it at about 30, 40%. It's probably closer to 60%. Split the difference, call it 70%. It's still only 150,000 trucks.
Huh?
Are you going to sell 40% of them?
Yeah. I don't see it. I don't see why. It's hard for me to imagine once these stats are out there and once people listen to what Pepsi had to say, why?
Because the charging network will take 5 years to stand up.
Yeah.
It's a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
A huge undertaking.
But a lot of this will be point-to-point charging. So, like with Pepsi,
then the TAM collapses.
Well, but Pepsi alone has 110,000.
Yeah, 112,000. But they're only going to change them, like
every 15 years. Yeah. So
yeah. So I mean, there are a lot of arguments you can make that sound really plausible, but when the rubber hits the road,
so to speak.
Actually, when the rubber hits the road, the transportation industry is incredibly conservative because they make so little money. And so when you come along and say, this is going to save you zillions, they've heard it all before, and they take it one step at a time, and they're constrained as to cash. So Pepsi's, Pepsi, the beer companies, the in-house distribution operators, by the way, the beer company is not in-house distribution. They're in-house distribution operations, but they're scattered They're scattered. I do think that we're all a little bit too aggressive in our view of what is possible. Anyway, the point is 60,000 trucks not going to be made in the first year, and they're going to be sold in the first year, and it's going to take 5 years to reach that
Wow.
in the United States. So having the European market is going to be important, and the European infrastructure will probably be stood up faster than the US infrastructure, just as it has for the electric car. But the
And by
market, I think that's the biggest market for us is the Far East,
yeah, China.
China.
Yeah, so it's by far the largest big truck market. Large
Yep.
market. Yeah.
And that's what I said in my piece. But where I got it wrong was, I constrained the potential TAM too much, and I thought Europe was out of bounds, but Europe apparently is not out of bounds. So that's exciting.
And what do you think about Tesla doing their own fleet, being in the shipping business?
Absolutely opposed to it. 100%, 1,000%, 2,000%. Tesla must not get into every business in which it has a dominant transport capability. It is a terrible business, the transport business. Look, 30 years ago, my single biggest client was a transport
Okay,
company.
that's right. Yeah.
And I watched them go out of business. I watched, I watched Yellow Freight go out of business.
Right.
I've watched transport company after transport company struggle.
Right.
They all go up and then they all come down. I mean, it's a terrible business. It why would they get into that business? What is the technology richness of that business? What?
Well, again, we're not talking about just the electrification. We're also talking about the automation. So if you have automated trucks that are
What
also
automation? What automation?
full self-driving.
But it's still, I mean, why would they want to get into that
Well,
business?
I don't know. That's why I was asking you, Larry.
It's a crazy it's one of the worst business. I mean, if you're Burlington Railroad or if you're, I mean, that's one thing. But tell me which transport company in this country is really making money.
I have no idea. I have a
In
little bit,
history, it's always been the top one or two.
yeah, I have a little background as somebody who's paid for a lot of trucking, and also
Yeah.
one of my clients was what do you call it, factor for the transportation industry. So I knew about that aspect of it and whatnot. But no, I don't know that much about the overall
Look,
business.
if they get autonomous trucks operating
Right,
for real,
right.
then certainly they could lease them out. Certainly they could rent them out. Certainly they could, have a network of them. But that's not the transport industry. The transport industry is getting loads and carrying loads.
Okay, so you would rather they just lease them out to the guy who's going to do that.
Rented them, leased them, whatever. But I'm telling you, to operate that business, the logistics of that business are as hair-raising as the actual labor of that business.
Right, right, right. So, speaking of transportation, FedEx this morning had some very bad news. Their stock went down, I forget, 11, 12%. We've talked about freight being a canary in the coal mine. And
Yes.
once again, we're seeing freight, which has been in recession for 2 years. But we're seeing now that FedEx is being hit by it. Their description, their analysis of it was that it's about the overnight part of their business. People are like, well, if it takes 2 days, that'll be okay instead of overnight. So they're cutting back on the expensive side of things, which would suggest corporate America is maybe, you know, pushing back a little bit on expenses.
Yeah, but FedEx 25 years ago, when I think it was when FedEx started, for $8 you could have a letter sent overnight across the country.
Right.
It was magic,
Magic.
absolute magic, and it was very cheap.
Yeah.
You know what it costs to send a letter overnight today?
Crazy. I,
I mean, it's like $40 or something.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you get a shock.
Yeah.
If you don't have a shipping department that you say send it overnight. I got a fright about 7 or 8 years ago when I asked for something sent overnight, and I got pushback from the shipping office, from the shipping department saying, "You really want to send it overnight? It's very expensive. We're under instructions." I said, "Really?"
Yeah.
So I went to our CFO. I said, "What's going on with the shipping thing?" He said, "Do you know what we're spending now on FedEx?" I said, "No." He showed me. Oh my God, stop it all. So it's I mean, it's got crazy, and it reflects what's going on in the shipping business, and it's a terrible business. Get out of it.
Now, UPS, when they had their bad numbers, they were blaming these Chinese direct companies
Yeah.
that my wife has actually been using. She's actually
Yeah.
bought some things
Me
from.
too.
Okay, so this is, of course, a threat to Amazon. This is a threat to domestic retailers, as well as to truckers.
But Amazon does a lot of direct shipping from China today. A
Yeah,
lot of direct shipping from China. And their direct shipping means that they still engage Amazon services this
right,
side of the pond.
right.
And so, I mean, I order my coffee pods, and it comes from Japan. I mean, can you believe it? Coffee pods come from Japan, and that's direct shipment.
Yes. I ordered an oboe from China. That turned out to be a very bad idea
Yeah,
because
so,
as soon as anything went wrong, it was not repairable. So it was a very good price, but it was not a very good deal.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I've had the same experience.
So, Larry, is there anything I've left out that's important right now that has been on your hot list the last few days?
Well, I was dilatory about putting together my questions
Yes. Okay.
for um, for the upcoming earnings call, and I will do that next week, and maybe we can compile the best of.
That's what we're working on. We've got about, I would say we're up to about 55 questions already from
Excellent,
various
excellent.
guys. Yeah. And that
Yeah,
doesn't count the ones that have been in the commentary below. So we're still inviting everybody, put your questions
perfect.
in the comments, put them on X, uh,
Yeah.
wherever you can, get them over to me so that we can compile them and then
Yeah, now
you know.
Tesla has been in the past very negative about us doing this conversation about questions on X.
Mm,
So, but maybe this is a good thing that we do it and see if we get pushback this time, because there's been a change in IR, and
right.
I don't know what SAY's policy on this is. But if we've compiled this many questions and we've had this conversation already on YouTube, why not? Let's
Right.
see what happens.
Okay. All right. And then how about your hybrid article? Or have you moved it? Yeah,
You
you've got
know,
two
it's so
things, huh?
interesting. It's so interesting. I've had so many conversations now about hybrids with so many people. And every time I have the conversation, I get a new perspective.
Oh, oh,
It is such a complicated question because I'm certain, I want to be less wrong.
yes.
And because I want to be less wrong, I'm kind of eking it out, because every time I come to, oh, this is the truth, this is the reality, I get another perspective and say, oh, wait a minute,
Eh,
this is different.
does any particular one come to mind? Maybe you could tease us with something that recently
Look,
challenged.
look, hybrids are having their day.
Right.
In a conversation this morning, I mentioned a sugar high,
Yeah.
but this sugar high is gonna drag on for a while. There are so many complexities about it. It all boils down to the hybrids are a way for ICE to remain relevant for a time to come.
Right.
And it's driven by the dealer network. It's driven by the need to have, service to follow up.
Right.
And it's driven by the interesting fact that hybrids are not necessarily that much more expensive or that much more complicated than ICE cars.
Right.
And the other complexity, I think we've spoken about this before, is that there are many forms of hybrid. There are roughly four categories of them, but they leach out one to the other. And it's interesting. I was speaking to quite a knowledgeable group this morning, and I mentioned about hybrids. And one of the most knowledgeable people said, "What do you mean there are multiple different kinds of hybrids?" So I had to spell it out, and I had to spell it out in very simple and very quick terms because it's
Yeah.
a lot of people, and so it's a complex question. People don't understand it. They use it as a crutch for their lack of understanding of the 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 positives of owning an EV,
Mhm.
and the industry as a whole are trying to use it as a way to eke out the ICE vehicles, and the regulators are somewhat fooled by it as well, and they see it as an easy out. And for all these reasons, it's doing well. And it's doing well in China, particularly, and it's doing well in the continent in particular. Not as much in the US, although it's still depressing, the rate of rise
Sure.
of EVs. So there's all these things going on, and the question is what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
think
that's the
about a year ago, I raised this issue because
yeah.
I was thinking about it one night and I thought, well, why wouldn't it be a reasonable short-term alternative until the price of the uh, BEVs gets so low compared to the hybrids that it just
uh,
doesn't make sense at all?
yeah,
And
but the
I got
conundrum.
so much clapback. I got so
You
I
know
was
the conundrum. The conundrum is that the longer you extend the life of the ICE vehicles,
right,
the less and the fewer EVs you sell, the less quickly you get to that.
of course,
But
yes,
if you look at Norway, you can see how a very focused government program and a very accepting
right,
um, uh, uh,
yeah,
customer base
okay,
can collapse the time cycles
right.
and improve the process dramatically. We'll see. I mean, I think that the reality of the fact is that hybrids do not do not subtract very much from the cost in terms of the climate of ICE vehicles. They do somewhat, but not very much, and putting government subsidies towards them is actually
Yeah,
destructive.
yeah, absolutely.
So, but I need to marshal these arguments and finalize them. I think I'm getting there. I've rewritten the article several times, and so it'll take another turn.
All right, well, let's look at the numbers real quick, Larry,
Yeah,
because it's Friday, so there's not that much to look at, but we've got the Dow ended actually up today,
yeah,
38.17. The Nasdaq,
surprising.
the Nasdaq did stay down. It was down, up, down, ended up down 65. S&P ended up down 11, and Tesla ended up down $5.67. Kept trying. It made several
I
efforts
know.
to get
Yeah.
into the green, but it just never quite got there. And then in
Can I
percentage,
make a point about the Dow?
sure.
I think this is the Dow's time. In the next 6 months, we're going to see the Dow perform better in relation to the Nasdaq than it has, and we're going to see the mid caps continue to not outperform but perform better than they have.
Mhm.
I think mid caps they're a trap, they're a value trap, but right now they're going to have their day.
Yeah, both because the mid caps are more dependent on borrowing, as well as in many cases they're smaller, or they're what do you want to call it, longer range payouts. So the lower interest rates would impact their valuations.
Yeah,
Yeah. All right. Okay. I agree 100%. By the way, for those who love the percentages, that is 0.09 up for the Dow, 0.36 down for the NASDAQ, and 0.19 down for the S&P. And I kid about those percentages, but believe me, I am 100% believer that the percentages are what matter. Uh,
I'm aligned with you. Yeah.
Actual numbers. I mean, I can't tell you. I've mentioned that I had a lot of clients for. I claimed 400. I think that's about right. Might have been a few more. 400 clients, and so I saw almost all their financials and their bookkeepers and or their CPAs sending them their financial reports. Never. I mean, it was so rare for them to include the percentages. I'm saying, how can you read this and get any value out of it without the percentages? So if you are currently a small business owner or you're in a position where you're giving advice or direction, if you're on the bookkeeping staff of a small business or a medium-sized business, and they don't have the percentages in their financials, well, first of all, change that. And second of all, get my book, Making Money Out of Thin Air, and that I wrote with a CPA, and it'll explain how to use those percentages.
That's really good advice.
Thank you.
That's really, but small business guys very seldom look at their books.
I know.
They run their business by the seat of their pants.
Absolutely right. And it kills business. I'll guarantee you it kills businesses or causes small businesses to end up on average right now, Larry, I'm talking about lawyers, doctors, chiropractors, CPAs, bike shops. I don't care what you're talking about. Average $70,000 a year in net income to themselves.
And it's dreadful.
It's dreadful, just dreadful. Okay. And that's a national statistic. I didn't just make that one up. Okay. Now, this is the most fascinating thing of the week, Larry. This is what we watch all the time, these bonds. And you're going to be able to help me through this, right? So today, the 10-year flat, but it was up yesterday. So it's back up to 3.741. I think we're maxed out. I think we go no higher than this, but there are people who think it might go back to 4. But now the 3-month dropped 6.2 basis points today, down to 4.76. I'm sorry, 3-month down to 4.672. That is only 90 basis points higher now than the 10-year. And the 2-month, though, now watch this. The 2-month went up 5% today, but it had been down. So at least it's closer. And finally,
amazing.
Finally, the 2-year is doing what it should do. It was down today, 7/10 of a basis point, and it is now well under the 10-year. So what in the world is going on with that 2-month today? But the 3-month is now acting what one would expect. It is moving down rapidly on the yields. So there is a rally going on there. I'm expecting the 2-month to follow. I've been saying that it's not investment advice, but it has to.
But the interesting fact is if you look at the money market funds, my Schwab money market fund, still 5 and a.
Really?
Yeah. I looked at it this morning. I'm expecting that number to drop materially.
Yeah.
But right now, that money market fund, 5 and a quarter, 5.24, which is slightly lower than it's been, but there you are. I mean,
yeah.
I hope they don't break the buck, but anyway.
Okay, let's see where oil is today. We've got oil, which has not materially different, basically up 0.13%. So Texas Intermediate is barely above 70 at 71.25. Brent at 74.72, and natural gas though up 4.6% today. I'm going to learn how to trade natural gas, Larry.
No, natural gas has got no bearing on economic. Well, there is an economic component to their value, but it's more weather related.
Right.
And what's coming out of the ground, what's expected of the weather, where the weather has been, and also the demand from Europe. And so you got like so many of these non-economic factors impacting it.
And then you have this whole other thing where Kamala is holding up the export of liquefied natural gas and allowing Russia to get the business from Europe because they put a pause on the export licenses. So That's also, but you get the
Yeah,
price
I
gap.
haven't been following that, and that's really weird. Why, this playing with the export of natural gas, why would you do that?
It would seem like it would be the easiest thing in the world to decide to export as much as we possibly can.
I
Good for
didn't
the
realize it was
economy.
a political issue. Is it a political issue?
I don't know how. I can't, well, just in general, because the the left tends to be against fossil fuels. But other than that, in the
Well, if Europe doesn't get the fossil fuels from us, they're going to have to get the fossil fuels from elsewhere because they are far ahead of us environmentally, but they need those fossil fuels.
But Larry, remember last when as soon as the administration got into office, they stopped the pipeline in the United States, but supported the pipeline from Russia to Europe. So
Until they didn't.
until they
Until
blew it up.
yeah, they blew it up. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But they closed colonial. I mean, not the colonial. The what was that?
Yeah,
The
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Right. They stopped it. Yeah. So yeah, you tell me about that policy. I can't figure it out at
Neither
all.
can I.
Gold up 32.50, Larry, another all-time high at 26.47 and change. So there you go.
3,000. Here we come.
Here we go. Yes. Silver up 0.23. I read, don't know if you read this the other day, Larry, but silver has actually been going up faster than gold.
Well, that typically happens, right?
Yeah.
Silver will, when gold's on this tear, silver will outstrip it and then will typically get to some kind of crash point
Right, right.
when it overshoots. It's going to overshoot, right?
Yeah, and one of my arguments right now, Larry, about the Fed's decision is that commodities are really, 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 really cheap.
Yeah.
And so they only have one way to go. They're more likely to go up than down at this point. And so that could be a problem later on with regard to the inflation issue if commodities start rising up again.
I don't think so. I think if we go into a worldwide
Well,
recession,
that's another problem. Yeah,
you
right.
know,
Yeah, that's another problem. Now, again, I always have to make clear, I think if we're in a recession now, and if we are going to be in a recession for the next 6 months, yeah, that's probably going to happen. But I also believe that the United States, at least, will not be in a recession by March, April of next year. We will be pulling out of it and going strongly ahead. That's Randy's call. Bitcoin down 164. Not much action in Bitcoin today. 63,219. So down below that kind of range that it used to be in. And then no pre-market, of course. So there you are, Larry. That's what happened today. Oh, we do have an after hours for Tesla. We should look at that. So after hours on Tesla up 0.27%. So that would be about $5, 50 cents. All right. So that's the whole story.
well, great week.
Yes,
I
excellent.
mean, the headline of this great week was semi.
Right.
What's the headline of next week going to be?
The headline for next week. Yeah, that's a good question. For the general popular for the economics, it'll be the PCE on Friday.
Right.
For
That's what the
Tesla, yeah, for Tesla, what will be the headline next week? Yeah, good question. Oh, um, it's already happening. So 12.5.2.1 on the uh, uh, hardware 3 is rolling out. Several people have already got videos up, and they're all saying that yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Yeah. I took out my hardware 3 Model 3 yesterday with it hasn't been updated
Right,
yet. Just for a last
right.
feel. And I've sort of notated the little bit of this
Refreshing.
herky jerky motion around some corners. I've kind of noted where they are, so I'm ready for the
Yeah,
upgrade for that to test and see how it does. But man, I gotta get my Cybertruck. I
that'll
mean,
be the headline. Maybe next
that
week,
would
Cybertruck will get its FSD.
okay. That would be that great from your lips.
to God's ears. You got to say the whole thing, Larry.
Yeah, but it's not PC, right? And we're so PC on this call.
I believe, by the way, that that is a Jewish saying. I,
Yeah,
I
it
never
is.
heard it outside of
Mhm.
my upbringing. I heard it, and then I didn't hear it for years.
Yeah,
And
yeah. To
oh yeah,
God's ears, I mean, yes, of course. Well, on that note, I'll bid you a great weekend.
you as well, Larry. As always, it's been great doing this with you, and to all of you out there, it's been great talking to you.